Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I've got a bunch of good guests on the stream today, and I think a pretty fun topic. We're doing something a little different. I know this is usually a political YouTube channel, talk about political theory, that kind of thing. But I thought it would be good, especially with everything going on right now, if we just kind of stopped and did something fun and talked about something a little lighter. So today we're going to be talking about the science fiction of Robert Heinlein, which is one of my favorite authors and definitely one of my favorite sci-fi authors. And I know it's somebody who he's obviously very popular widely, but he's very interesting for people kind of in our sphere because he's good at writing things that are, a different political voices. So I thought he would be a little bit of a departure, but not too much of a departure. The Distributist is going to be along in a little bit. He's running a little late, but for the people we have so far, I've got American Ostrakon and I've got Clossington. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be back on.
Yeah, we're going to take a break from political theory to have some delicious science fiction wrapped political theory.
Exactly. Yes, we're gonna put a layer of an abstraction on our political theory today for the fun. And if you guys, by some weird chance, have not subscribed to either Clossington or the Distributist, I've got their channel links below in the description of this video. But like I said, while we're waiting for the Distributist to show up, we're probably just going to go ahead and start off with a little bit of discussion of Heinlein in general. We're looking mainly at three of his books this time. We're looking at Starship Troopers, Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and Stranger in a Strange Land. We might get to some of his other works depending on how things go. But those are going to be kind of our main three. And one of the reasons I like Heinlein so much is that he is a guy who writes from a very interesting perspective. He's able to weave some political theory into his books. He's able to structure them around it. But he also writes it from multiple different angles, and we'll get into it with more detail. But you've got Starship Troopers, which is famously very right-wing state-centric, and then we've got the Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which is very libertarian in its outlook, and then we go to Stranger in a Strange Land, which I guess you could kind of it was the book that defined the New Age that was very popular at that time. And so it's three very different voices. And so that's one of the things I like about Heinlein is that he's got those different voices. But Clossington, you were noticing some different themes as you were kind of going back and rereading some of these books in his work. Do you want to talk about those real quick?
Sure. I guess I'd noticed, let's just say, three different running commonalities between the three different books. The first is more aesthetic than anything. It's his self-insert characters. Again, Stranger in this Strange Land, his name was Jubal. He is sort of his self-insert character. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I think it's Professor La Paz, maybe. And then in Starship Troopers, Rico's teacher, Jean Dubois, is definitely his sort of philosophical self-insert character. But these characters kind of all preach the same general philosophy of absolute conscientious practical politics. And then on the other end, it's heterosexual polyamory, which kind of crops up in which it's those polyamory is a major sort of fixture of Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Stranger in a Strange Land, but you can kind of see the sort of gender neutral. I won't say it's gynocentrism, but kind of a strange perspective of gender norms and gender roles. I'd say he's very concerned about. Politically, he's very concerned about personal responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions, taking responsibility for everyone you're socially connected to, forming authentic and often either sexual or economic bonds with your loved ones. Like that's sort of the most important aspect of his politics. Whether it's service guarantees citizenship, you have to intimately be be affiliated with an organization to actually have any sort of real skin in the game. Similarly, Moon is a Harsh Mistress. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You have to rely on your family and your community for a lunch, and that requires some reciprocal relationships. And then Stranger in a Strange Land, it's complicated, and I just finished listening to its audiobook, so I'm sort of shell-shocked by the last third. So I'm still processing that one.
Yeah, and that's the one that that I read the longest ago. That was probably the one I've read, maybe almost 15 plus years ago. So that one's probably the one that's a little fuzzy for me. But we'll get more into that when we get to Stranger in a Strange Land. Ostrakon, I know you kind of read Starship Troopers and Moon is a Harsh Mistress kind of for the first time recently. Was there anything that you noticed kind of between the two that were kind of connected or running themes with Heinlein?
Yeah, it's I think what we find between the two is I think they really read well as companion pieces, and one is more. I would say the Moon is the Harsh Mistress is all about the increased responsibility of the individual for personal gain, and then Starship Troopers would be the increased responsibility of the individual for the community gain. Now, obviously, one is more I would say. Starship Troopers is a military meritocracy, whereas the Moon is the Harsh Mistress is this it's a socialist democracy, or also just a very libertarian a libertarian society. So it's yes, you have bonds in both of them, and I agree with what Clossington said, where you have these bonds between individuals, be it family group or your military unit, but the purpose of those bonds is very different in both of these books. In Starship Troopers, the bonds are there because you have to rely on these people in a combat situation, and if you can't trust the people around you, you're not going to maintain an effective fighting unit. And the other, in Moon is a Harsh Mistress, those bonds exist to further generational wealth and to have a family safety net, because anytime things become too difficult for any one individual, the people within the family can kind of fill in, and they have like their chain marriages, right, where it's just one big family married together to keep all their wealth internal to that family and increase it. So, but the need to be part of a group in order to be successful, I think, is a common theme in both of those books.
I think you hit the nail right on the head with the sort of line marriages of the Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It's the social order in Moon is very communitarian, and that's just out of necessity because they're on the moon, and you have to be a very tight-knit community in order to survive on the moon.
Yeah, their resources are limited, and
yes.
I would even include being able to procreate is a limited resource for them. That's one of the things they talk about in the book is, the Earth in the book just has infinitely more resources than the moon will ever have. And so in order to fight a war against the Earth, they have to rely on, they can't just outproduce them in order to be successful.
Right. I was getting more at just to give a little bit of context. In The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, the moon was initially established as a penal colony, but eventually it kind of evolved into a very prosperous. What do you call it? Like an agricultural center.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But initially, you had incredibly harsh Darwinian conditions in which those who were unconscientious or or morally disagreeable, they died. They were just sent out the airlock. And
if you didn't play nice with others, you didn't last long.
Yeah, exactly. So you have the most harsh economic and social incentives to be pro-social. And out of that pro-social necessity comes line marriages, essentially clans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to start with Starship, but we're already into Moon's Harsh Mistress. So I think
I'm sorry if I
that's fine. You guys started down a good line, so let's just go there. There's no reason to try to rearrange it. So just heading into this, guys, warning. There will be spoilers here, probably. That we're going to be going deep into it. So if you're worried about spoilers for like 50-year-old books, then be prepared. But as you guys were talking about, the Moon's Harsh Mistress is really interesting because obviously, it's this colony. It's set up, and at first, it's very much like you said, very harsh conditions. It has to be. They really have to carve a piece out of it. People are really expected to go there and die. And as they go, they start realizing it's a great way to grow food. They start spending a large amount of their time shipping food back to Earth, which makes them prisoners. It's a prison colony at first. They slowly become, some of them are born free. They're born outside of their time as prisoners. But it doesn't really matter because there's no way to leave. Like, most of the people can't survive on Earth anyway. So there's really no option. It's not like you can flee the moon. And so they start becoming more important to the Earth and not just a prison colony because, like you said, they become agriculturally important. They become the breadbasket, as someone was saying, for Earth. And so it becomes an interesting dynamic. And one of the things that we got into right away is the marriage system. Because as Ostrakon pointed out, there are, as you would imagine, in a penal colony, far fewer women. More people are now going there voluntarily, but it's still very much more men. And what's interesting is like what Clossington starts pointing out. It becomes a very almost gynocentric society. Not that the men aren't manly, but that the women, because they are in short supply and absolutely necessary, simply get to dictate more of the behavior. Like everyone, they don't seem to try to demasculinize the men, but it is clear that at the end of the day, they are dictating relationship terms due to their value, which is what creates these line marriages where it's a number of people intermarried because because basically he said no woman would only go with one man, and so it became necessarily and the marriages become very utilitarian. They're highly utilitarian in that they protect property and these kind of things, which would be necessary inside those marriages.
Yeah, everything is scarce on the moon, right? Water is scarce. Food is not scarce because they produce it there, but they have to ship most of it back to the Earth. Women are scarce. Any sort of anything that requires any sort of technology in order to produce computers, any sort of luxury items. So because they basically have one thing that everyone needs, which is food that they ship back to Earth, but everything else has to be provided by the Earth. And so it completely shapes their society and how it functions based upon the economic needs of that society. Well, and as they move on throughout the story, what they come to discover is it's actually they're not getting their return on their investment, and they're actually losing out, and their water's running out. What they're shipping home is not commensurate to what they're getting back from the Earth, and that leads to the big plot of the book.
Like the raw deal that the moon gets is the fact that it's, as a penal colony, the warden and the central authority is this big monolithic bureaucratic organization that de facto runs the moon, but they don't actually care about what you do so long as you produce food, trade with them, buy your water, like, was it 4 times?
Yeah, you buy it once to drink, and then you actually buy the same water back again as waste product after it's been used. Right? You buy it once to drink, buy it again to use as basically like toilet water, and then buy it a third time to be using that same water again to fertilize your fields. And at every juncture transaction in water, they're having to pay again for that same water.
Yeah, and then after the water is used to produce wheat, it's shipped down to Earth, or it's catapulted back to Earth. And in doing so, the moon, which is a sort of contained ecosystem, loses water, or closed system. It loses water every time they ship out wheat. So in future generations, there will be even more scarce water, and future generations will be screwed in the long run.
But the way they calculate it in the book, it's not even for future generations. They realize it's within like 5 years.
Something absurd like that.
They're going to be completely out of water. So obviously their relationship with the Earth is unsustainable. And again, that's the main plot, and that's what leads to the changes in the book.
Yeah, so this is probably a good time to introduce another theme inside the book, which is the artificial intelligence. One of the ways they figure out that the moon is heading for disaster is that there's the computer, that the main character is a guy who works on the computer. He's one of the few people who can repair the sophisticated computer there, and it's become self-aware. And because he's the only one who can really work on it, he's the only one who knows. And the computer ends up predicting that, they're, like you said, it's like 5 or 7 years. They'll start having water riots, and 10, 12 years later, it'll wipe things out. I think we've got the Distributist here, so let me add him real quick.
Yeah, Manny, the main character.
How's it going?
Hey, thanks for joining us. All right, so we were just in talking about Moon the Harsh Mistress, and we were talking about the resource scarcity problem that was developing. That the computer notices that they're basically they're going to run themselves out of water by working for the Earth and doom themselves, and so that's where we were jumping in.
Like the first part was about the sort of necessity of close social bonds to actually make the system work, and then the fatal flaw that this social system will collapse through no fault through the fault of the economic system that is explicitly extractive. And so you have a society that is on the road to absolute collapse, and so they revolt against the central authority.
And the reasons for, because there's already fomentations of revolt. They want to, the people who live there, there's a significant minority who want the political system to change. But I don't think anyone, until it's calculated by the computer, nobody realizes how quickly things do need to change, or it's going to be, their system is going to be unsustainable completely. And so it's basically the will was there, but then once they got the hard data, they realized they had to create they had to conduct these changes far more quickly than they originally projected. Which, that's I think that's a really interesting theme when it comes to any sort of political change. Is you end up laying all this groundwork, and it can be for years and years, and in this case, it's going on for years. And then there's an outside factor that really moves up all the timetables, and political change becomes a necessity almost yesterday in the book. And so they have to move relatively quickly over the course of about a year, a little bit more, maybe, in order to completely change this basically being a colony of the Earth to being an independent political system.
Yeah, they at first, like you said, it was really just more. It's funny because I think they even explicitly call themselves comrades and have red hats, and it's a workers' rights movement. But the workers' rights movement is the right they want is a free market, right? They want a market. So it's funny because they're using obviously they're borrowing the language of kind of a communist revolution or socialist revolution, but they're fighting for libertarian, the libertarian option. They want the ability to sell their products without the interference of the central government. But once they uncover that they're bleeding the planet or the moon dry to feed Earth, they realize that things have to change. What they're advocating for is simply not enough.
Yeah, I made a note that in the first political meeting that is in the book, the sort of workers' revolution, they have the iconography of the French Revolution. They have a big sign saying liberty, equality, fraternity. They were wearing the red Jacobin hats. I think Wayo nods to Lenin a couple times. You said that they refer to each other as comrade, particularly the sort of intellectuals behind the party, vanguard. But then there's the sort of, I guess, the sort of switch to an actual active rebellion, where things get a little bit messier.
Yep. So as the story goes along, obviously they confront the authority of the colony, and relatively quickly they take over the moon. But then, of course, the long term part, or the longer part of the book, is actually about not so much being successful and physically taking over the moon, but then having the Earth recognize the moon as a independent political organization.
Yeah, you actually get that revolution, relatively early in the book. I feel like it's a third to half of the way through.
Yeah,
and then the rest of the book is, like you said, it's more about them creating a political organization on the moon and then trying to get legitimacy with Earth. But as we know, touched on a little bit, the computer, the AI, I believe Mike is his name, that they name him. He is basically running the rebellion, but without anybody knowing about it. So the structure of the rebellion is very complex. The cells are small and interlinking, and they break down. And one of the interesting things about the book is Heinlein really goes into the details of how you would create cells for a rebellion and how they would properly set up, launching things at Earth if they need to, and how they would manipulate all these things. He goes into a lot of minutia and detail. There's a lot of story pipe laid, an exposition and technical stuff laid down in between those things. Long talks about those, which I thought was very interesting, that he broke into the details of how this rebellion was structured, so no one really knew that it was run by a computer.
Yeah, because the computer represents himself as an actual person throughout most of the book that's leading the revolution. And there's physical images of him on TV and whatnot. And he actually, I think Manny gets actually pretty annoyed with him throughout the book on how he's created this physical manifestation of himself. Because I feel like the main character is more practical, unless he's not an idealist. He's the everyman that's been thrust into this situation. He gets the book kind of works it out in the end, but I feel like the AI, if the AI continued throughout the rest of the book and lived, let's say, at the end of the book, I think things really could have gotten out of hand. It served its purpose, but then it disappeared. Maybe that's part of the story, is the AI knew it had served its purpose, and so that's why it went away. But yeah, I was always waiting in the book for the AI to go too far, but it never does.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of a symptom of the early sci-fi authors being somewhat optimistic about about how tech will be in the future. I remember early on in the book, Manny, I think he calls Mike the supercomputer a mixture of a baby and an old wise man, or something like that. And he has this very professional, well, I'd say it's professional sort of relationship with Mike. And then this girl revolutionary Yo gets access to Mike and turns it into a girl and makes it into more of a girl than
So when the computer talks to Yo, it takes on a female persona, and when it talks to Mike, it has a male persona. Manny. Sorry, the computer's Mike. When he talks to Manny, he's got a male persona, and then that's kind of a nice little back and forth argument throughout the book. What is the gender of the computer, and I think the point is it's whatever appeals to that person that the computer's talking to.
Yeah,
it's a nice little story element. I actually found her character to be kind of boring, but Yo. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Like I think another way to go at sort of Manny's character is he's somewhat. I mean, I wouldn't say he's complacent or he's fine with status quo, but he has his little niche. Like I could imagine him on Earth being something like some sort of homesteader in rural Montana or something like that, with his big clan out there. Sure, they might leech some utilities off the government, but they have and they ensure he has a well-paid professional job, but everything's somewhat sustainable, or at least for the foreseeable future. And his line marriage is very profitable. So he doesn't really at first he says, yeah, I can be a revolutionary on the side, but I'm kind of fine with status quo. And then the sort of resource trap just kicks in hard.
Yeah, and then by the end of the book, he goes from a computer technician to supreme commander of the moon's forces, which I thought was interesting. And he's not really a character that ever really wanted it, but he was always the one that had the know-how and in order to do whatever it is that needed to get done.
I mean, this is. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
This is kind of the stuff
I think
I kind of want. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This is kind of the stuff I wanted to get into a little bit. Is and you kind of touched on it a few times. Is just sort of like the incredible boomer optimism of Heinlein. Like the characters always just stumble like bass backwards into these like insanely awesome situations of power, and everything kind of works out for them. It's like in every story, the protagonist will find himself in like, a sex cult with all these nubile women, or like he'll be a computer like data entryist, and then the next day he's like, "Wow, I'm commander of the moon," and the technology works out perfectly. How could it not? I mean, I think that's sort of an interesting element about Heinlein. You can't imagine it any other time, certainly not in our own.
Well, I think it's just I kind of disagree with that. Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think the point is that extraordinary times calls upon ordinary people to be more, and that's the point, right? I think any one of us could be one of these characters. And
sure, and I think it makes sense in terms of the plot. Like inside the plot, it makes sense. I'm not criticizing it from a narrative point of view, but I think that if you had like 3 books where something like that happened, and our generation would be kind of raising an eyebrow, but I think the boomers are much more at home with this. Like, well, of course, he just gets promoted to this insane position. That's how things work, right? I
mean, George Washington was a colonial officer of no great renown before he became the supreme commander of, the American forces, during the Revolution. He wasn't even a very good officer.
I think the general trend that Dave is pointing at is the fact that during this sort of golden age of sci-fi, where you had Heinlein, you had Arthur C. Clarke, and you had Isaac Asimov, right? Very optimistic futures in which technology is ultimately a good thing, and humanity is sort of humanity maintains its humanity and its grasp on control over its technology.
Instead, we use our technology for spying on each other and shitty online dating. How depressing our reality has become.
Yeah, yes. In this sort of golden age of sci-fi, there's still a man outside the machine. Meanwhile, we've had the cyberpunk movement in which the man is within the machine, or the man has been absorbed by the machine. And I think that's when the boomer optimism completely crashes.
Yeah, it's definitely more aspirational, and you'll see, like you said, you'll see these people get put into these positions through interesting mechanisms. One of my favorite parts of the book is when they have right after they have the revolution, the professor character is he's the guy who's kind of masterminding things that are the soft parts out besides Mike. The supercomputer, and they need to set up a government. And Manny, the main character, is terrified because he's like, you can't let these idiots run this place as a democracy. They'll destroy everything. Like they're already arguing about every aspect of it. And the whole times, the computer and the doctor are just like, wait and see. And basically they set it up so that all of these people end up arguing against each other in Congress, and they can't do anything. And then all the people who are actually the core parts of the conspiracy, all the elites, are the ones that actually end up running anything. They actually get installed in positions of power, and all these people who were the hanger-ons who weren't really going to contribute anything get shoved into the legislature where they can't actually do any damage, which I thought was pretty hilarious.
Yes, I found that funny. I like how it's like, don't worry, it's all going to work out. Listen, we're not going to leave the revolution and the change in politics to the people who didn't actually do anything.
Yeah, there's Lenin kicking in the Kerensky regime. I mean, they alluded to Lenin, and then they actually did a Lenin.
I just like how the engine is socialism, but the product it makes is not socialism.
Like as I kind of hinted at, or as I alluded to at the beginning of the live stream, this sort of Moon as a Harsh Mistress Moon society is sort of big tent anarchist, or at least it tried to be at first. This weird hybrid of anarcho-communist sort of autarkic communitarianism mixed with a free market. There's no such thing as a free lunch. But
and how does that balance against the fact that it's ruled by the secret cabal of elites?
Yeah, and that's when the revolution is completely, or like when the revolutionary optimism is just kind of subverted by reality.
I did find that part of the book kind of depressing as I was reading through it, is like the only reason they were able to achieve their goals is they just lied to the people constantly throughout the entire thing.
What that's true though. I mean, that's depressing. That's kind of the more interesting part of it, right? I mean, like this is something that you see in classical political theory, is the idea that the narratives used to justify power in some sense have to be fictional.
Yeah. No, I it's not that I don't agree with the assessment, it just depresses me.
Yeah, I think it is important though, because obviously, as we often end up talking real politics. A lot of times, people will get really, they'll get very concerned when people talk about like why that might be necessary, and exploring it in a fictional space allows you to understand maybe without the emotional connection being as vivid. Like, no, actually, this is why that works, and this is actually how it always works. And that's the great thing about sci-fi. You can explore those things without being as personally attached when you kind of take the ideas and turn them around in your hand and look at them.
But I would argue, and we don't have to transition to Starship Troopers, but it's a comparison. I would argue that, yes, it's a different situation, right? You're creating a new form of government, and the moon is a harsh mistress. And in Starship Troopers, the government is already in place. But I would say that, yes, even in that book, there are, let's say, mysteries to how government is run. But it's much more accessible to the common man in the Starship Troopers than it is in the moon is a harsh mistress, right?
Well,
there's a very small elite in the moon is a harsh mistress. But anyway,
let's hold off on transitioning to Starship Troopers quite yet. We haven't. I don't think we've mined everything out of Moon as a harsh mistress yet. But we'll get there. Don't worry.
I see what you did there.
Yep. So obviously we talked about the revolution and the government taking over, and the elites are they set up democracy, but the elites, and you'll notice that he borrows the doctor who's the professor who's supposed to be kind of advising everything. He borrows all the front-facing stuff from Thomas Jefferson, right? Like he waxes eloquent about the importance of the American Constitution and Jefferson and everything, but the structure behind the scenes is, like I said, far more practical. Is far more what needs to get done to set things up so that the core group, the original group, stays in control.
Isn't the Molebug dichotomy something like the show versus, what's it called, the machine, or
the show is like the fifth organ of the system outside that basically just kind of distracts everybody from the main four that are actually running things.
Right. In the main four that is running everything is literally a centralized machine.
Right.
I would say other than Manny as a character, and maybe what's the other guy? The French guy, Stuart Rene. I would, other than those two characters, I would say most of the other leadership is a leadership of foxes and not lions. It is a majority of leaders who are foxes in this particular book.
Like, to what extent do you think this is Heinlein's actual experience with politics? Something like a Kennedy liberal himself, or at least what he professed in real life.
I don't know. He writes from multiple perspectives pretty well.
Yeah, but at the same time, he has his self-insert characters, and the books all kind of have a logical consistency to them in a strange kind of way if you read them back to back.
No, I agree. They can be read as companion pieces.
Yeah, but so to what extent does his imagined organization of a rebellion have sort of corollaries to the Democratic Party of his day? Like, I mean, it's all conjecture, but maybe he's kind of letting his power levels shine through his sci-fi works.
I mean, I think his characters that he respects the most are the ones that are practically and actually doing something, where he brings his representation in the books brings the word, but the ones that he tends to respect the most in the book are the ones who actually perform the action.
Well, the smart character, you're probably usually trying not to put yourself in insert character as the main character.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Right. So I think that's probably part of it. But that is
unless you're Ayn Rand.
Yeah, well, right.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
It's certainly not Ayn Rand. Yes. But yeah, people who are doing good work usually are usually not trying to put their self-insert character, even if they exist, are usually not putting them as the main like audience introduction to the story. But that's interesting, Clossington. I had not really thought a ton about how that correlates to his practical experience. You might be right. I don't know enough about his personal experience, but that is interesting. I had not thought about that.
It's quite obvious that his sort of sexual proclivities bleed into his sci-fi work.
Yeah.
That's like saying every man's sexual proclivities is. I mean, like his proclivities are not.
No,
particularly,
but Heinlein particularly, like, I have no idea what Herbert's sexual proclivities are, right? But I have a very clear idea what Heinlein's are, right?
Yeah. In Stranger in a Strange Land, he might as well come out and tell you how much he admires Freud and sort of all motivational factors coming from sex and from authority, and I don't know. You can see the kind of person he is.
I don't find him the most convincing interpersonal relationship writer. He needs to stick more with his politics and his sci-fi. But yeah, I don't know. I don't find it very deep. It's like he wants more than one woman. It's like, yeah, and what red-blooded man doesn't? Like, it's not a particularly deep part of the book, I think. And I do agree it's a running theme throughout his stories.
But
I didn't find it very.
I remember in watching Sargon's analysis of Starship Troopers, he lines up. He kind of frames Heinlein's view of politics and personal. Sargon kind of points to a dichotomy or some sort of split between the public and the private, where Heinlein says, on the face of all like in public life, you have a conscientious and dutiful role to play, and then in public you have to be conscientious, but you can kind of let your guard down and do whatever libertine things you want, strictly consensually. Although I do believe his self-insert character gets a little bit molested in Stranger in a Strange Land, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, so we'll probably move over to Starship Troopers in a second, but let's go ahead and tie up Moon as a Harsh Mistress. I think the last piece really left in the story is basically they have to go to Earth, and they send the two of the main characters to Earth in a way that they launch them in this like grain container to give them this romantic story. And the Manny, kind of the main character, he, as always, he doesn't know the whole plan. So he's there acting as supreme commander of the moon, and he's there thinking that they're on the diplomatic mission, and the professor is supposed to be, the diplomat who's going to get them this peace treaty with the Earth and figure all this out. And what happens is that he slowly realizes, or it's revealed to him, I think, that actually they're there to pick a fight. They're there to start a war with Earth, because that's the only way they're actually going to get independence. And so he goes with the intention of looking for this peace treaty, but they actually end up looking to set up this battle.
Yeah, and it's I think it's probably the most interesting part of the story is the way in which they figure out how to. I don't want to say they don't defeat the Earth, but basically they reach a stalemate with the Earth in such a way that it no longer becomes economically viable for the Earth to continue its war with the moon. And the way in which we could spend hours going into details on how they do that, but they are successful in doing so. And then at the end of the book, it's the last few pages are the actual, let's say the kinetic conflict between the Earth and the moon. And it's interesting, or the build up to get there I really like. It makes sense within the story.
Mm-hmm. Well, did anyone else have anything about Moon as a Harsh Mistress they wanted to touch on before we move over to Starship Troopers?
I like Renee's character. I think he was my favorite character in the book.
The sympathizer, the Earth, the Emperor.
Yeah, he was, and in the end, he wants to turn Professor La Paz into a king. That's his personal goal.
Yes, he does that. Yeah, because he's a monarch. He's a
monarchist.
That's right. I forgot about that.
I love his character. He's definitely my favorite character in the book. And he's the only one who's got any like love for life, right? Like he drinks, he womanizes. He reminds me of a very much almost a Benjamin Franklin-esque character where, yes, he's politically savvy, but he's also, a human. He's a fun character.
Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on to Starship Troopers. Obviously, this one's probably the most famous just because of the movie. Which I think
we should mention the Paul Van Verhoeven movie too.
Yeah,
that's kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah. So this one's probably the most famous because of the movie, and because that movie specifically, I think, has a very big impact on people, like kids from the 90s. Like if you grew up in the 90s, like I think that movie was I'm trying to remember, but I think I saw that movie on video or whatever, just as I was early teens. And so it's obviously there's a lot about that movie we can talk about and what it means. But that's going to be, I think, the impression a lot of people have of Starship Troopers. But because Ostrakon, it was the first time that you had read it, and you are someone with military experience, I thought maybe it'd be interesting if you would just give your perspective first on what you saw in that book as someone who's kind of been in military, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a everyone's obviously personal journey is different when it comes to their military service, but I think it's a pretty accurate representation in some ways of the lessons you have to learn in order to be successful in the military. And it's I really liked the concepts that it pushes of obviously relying on the individuals in your unit, and the concept of hard training makes for easy fighting. I mean, these are just little tidbits here and there, little let's say salt shaker nuggets that somebody who's been in the military would notice, that not necessarily people that. I like that aspect of the book. I love the concept of the meritocracy. I mean, obviously, this is probably the book I enjoyed the most just because of my background. But I think the message it sends, that citizenship or your ability to represent yourself as politically is a right that must be earned by the individual and not something that's issued out by the state. Right. It is something that you, through service to the state, you earn your right to have a political voice, which is very much goes back. I mean, you even go back to like the ancient city-states of Greece, right? The people who voted were the people who were part of the political system, and not necessarily just a democracy, but the people who were part of that political system were also the ones who defended the state externally. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's like kind of my main takeaway from the book.
Like I think you're right about Heinlein's sort of analogy to ancient Athens, insofar as back in ancient Greece, the citizens were called upon to fight in the wars, and in this sort of battle formation of the sort of proto-phalanx, everybody has to know their place. You have to trust the person who is right next to you, right shoulder to shoulder with you. You have to trust each other not to move, trust each other that you all want the same thing, to protect your home. And then once you get back from the battle, you have to be able to rely on them in politics, in this democratic.
Yeah, and it creates a bond where you're going to have a higher level of trust between individuals due to that shared service.
Like I think it's the same sort of rough pseudo democracy that comes about when you have a bunch of pirates on a pirate ship, and instead of might makes right, it's we all pool our own weight and we all rely on each other to make good decisions, and it's that sort of personal responsibility that really makes the system, and not necessarily, I guess, the decisions or the hierarchy itself. It's just responsibility, good; hierarchy, good. Recognize who is worthy and who is capable of ruling. And it's a temperament. It's not an actual. It's not an actual structure.
It's it feels like a more healthy political system than in The Moon is the Harsh Mistress, right? The reason they're able to achieve their goals in that book is they're able to lie to the people constantly and kind of funnel them in the right direction in order to achieve their goals. Now, the people do benefit from it. Like it's not that they're not just there to enslave their own people on the moon, but I feel like there are mysteries, like political mysteries within Starship Troopers. The civilian population often doesn't understand what would possess somebody to do something difficult like perform military service in order to vote or to have a political opinion, when they pretty much are able to have they have all the other rights except political rights as civilians and not citizens. And it's like, why go through all the effort? And there's multiple gates throughout the book that discourage people actively from joining military service as a way to basically, there's like a cooling off period after you first join. The person who represents the military at the high school is a person, while he's talking about the military, right? He's all mangled, right? His arm and his legs are missing. And then of course they reveal, Johnny Rico realizes just after that, is that he's got prosthetics and he uses them in all other situations. And the prosthetics he uses make him indistinguishable from anyone else when he's off duty. So like there's this kind of theater play to try and discourage you from joining up. And then that once you've crossed over to the other side, they reveal to you the practical reasons of which they do that.
Well, Dave, you had mentioned the movie, obviously being the elephant in the room. Do you want to go a little more into kind of the implications of the movie and the impact that's had on people's perceptions of the Starship Troopers?
Well, I mean, the movie is by, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. Is it Paul van der Hoven? It's some Dutch. It's some Dutch name.
Van der Hoven. I think.
Van der Hoven. I'm missing the D. So he was the person behind Total Recall and RoboCop. And in each of those cases, I believe RoboCop was an original script and also probably the best of those. But Total Recall was taken from a short story by another kind of Heinleinian sci-fi author, not Kurt Vonnegut, Philip K. Dick.
Yep.
And so this was the third venture into classic sci-fi. And Paul van der Hoven always likes using these action movies as semi-satires. So you could see this obviously in RoboCop with the constant, soulless corporate environment that's nonetheless inundated by crime. I can't imagine how that could possibly happen in a modern society, but that was how it was in the sci-fi. And and so the same thing occurs in Starship Troopers, where he essentially inserts satire about the society into the so basically you get introduced to the society not through like in Heinlein's book, you don't get introduced to it through the characters, you get introduced to it through film clips or film reels, essentially propaganda from the state. And of course, this propaganda from the state is way over the top and transparently politically motivated to anyone in the audience from the 1990s. And I think the criticism, and it certainly makes it very, very much like RoboCop or Total Recall, but I think a lot of people don't like this satirical element to it because it allows people who watch the movie to look at the society of Starship Troopers and go, oh, this is just their whole only citizens can vote who do military service. This is just one of their stupid things that they fall for, just like the propaganda reels. And there's no actual exterior logic behind it that I should take seriously. I guess I appreciate that. I'm not so sure it would have been so easy to do Starship Troopers as a straight movie, and I can't imagine that being very successful, at least in the 90s. Maybe now it would be. But I think that's a critique that I noticed that Starship Troopers is very popular with people on the left because they feel it satirizes the right-wing personality. And so if you listen to something like El Chapo Trop House, you'll have him essentially use that, or those guys, they'll use Starship Troopers as a jumping off point to understand the authoritarian personality. And of course, they're talking about the movie and not the book. But I guess, I don't know. To me, it's a silly version. It does make it harder to take the ideas seriously, and the ideas in their serious form aren't even necessarily brought up in full in the movie at all. I don't know. I kind of appreciate it as a cultural artifact. I don't think you could have made a non-comedic version in the 1990s and have that taken seriously.
Yeah, I think I've seen that director specifically say like he got handed that movie, like he had to do it as part of like his deal. Mm-hmm. And so because he read the book and he thought it to be fashy, he's like, all right, well, I'm going to make this a spoof, and leaned really hard and turned it up to 11, and so those were all very intentional. He thought it was a very clever way of kind of making the movie he was forced to make. Like, it'll still be an action movie, it'll still be geared at a certain, you know, youth demographic, but it will cartoonishly play these things up rather than trying to take them on straight.
I don't think necessarily.
Unfortunately, most people didn't realize it was satire, which is impressive.
Well, the problem is that
It's hard to miss that, isn't it? I mean,
But some people still take it at face value.
I was 13 and I realized that was
When
satire.
talking about that book, or it's not the book, sorry, talking about that movie.
I was 13 years old and I realized that was satire. I think it was hard to miss.
I think you're a more observant 13-year-old, because I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who say that's an awesome action movie, and wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, exactly.
So no, I think Ostrakon's right. I think there are plenty of people who like that movie without irony and without any look at it as satire.
Well, like here's
Fair enough.
The fundamental philosophy of Heinlein in the book is fairly, I guess, solid and understandable, but it is layered over with this satire that, you know, it's kind of unexcusable. Like when you have what was his name, Neil Patrick Harris was literally like an SS uniform, and you have propaganda reels. Like Lenny Riefenstahl, like propaganda reels. How do you
like to know more?
Like how do you defend that? Like you can't exactly defend the philosophy of the book without also implicitly supporting this imagery, which is connected to all sorts of heinous other stuff.
The philosophy of the book and the message of the movie are very different. But I would be more than happy to defend the philosophy of the book.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, like, you know, I don't know what audience we're really discussing this in context with. I mean, for any thinking person doesn't hate Hitler because of Hugo Boss, right? So like, you know, if you're going to draw a line from Starship Troopers the movie to Doogie Howser to Hugo Boss, and then from Hugo Boss to Hitler, I mean, you know, most people who aren't hypochondriac SJWs are going to kind of think somewhere in that process and separate out images from reality, right?
The problem is that no one actually knows what the fascists actually believed, or what you only really have a cartoonish cardboard cutout.
Yeah, they believed in Hugo Boss
with the aesthetics, and of course, you know, anyone from mid-century Germany would have totally agreed with Heinlein in the philosophy he espoused in the book, no questions asked. But you know, once you actually read the book, you see this is pretty much, well, a different society, but somewhat similar to mid-century U.S. minus universal citizenship, plus the equivalent of maybe like a Star Trek kind of diplomacy with these other alien races, plus sort of the backdrop of the Cold War. Like in the book, you have this one government that does diplomacy with these other alien races. Like in the book, you actually see the I forget what they were called, these skinny aliens.
They're called the skinnies.
Yeah, the skinnies. They're kind of like the Greys, but yeah, you can't. You have the system that is not entirely alien, and it's not exactly fascy. It's just the military. But then Verhoeven presents it as if it is this mid-century German like system.
I mean, the political system in the book is not a military dictatorship. It's a more of a nationalist democracy, and I agree with you, Clossington. I think it's maybe if you're going back to late 1940s, mid 1950s United States, it would be of a fairly similar mindset. But yeah, the message of the book and the message of the movie is very different. They do draw on a couple things, like they draw lightly on the political philosophy of help me out here, the teacher in the book.
Oh, I don't remember his name.
It was Jean Dubois.
That's right.
The history and moral philosophy course.
Yeah, the history and moral philosophy course.
In the movie, they combined Ratchek with the teacher. In the book, they're two different people.
Yeah,
Yes.
Michael Ironside is like the fusion of those two.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well,
and Michael Ironside in your movies, wouldn't you want to double cast him?
absolutely. That's right. If he's going to chew the scenery, you might as well give him all he can get, right?
Yeah.
And he was in both of those other Verhoeven movies. He was the bad guy in he was the main bad guy in Total Recall and the sort of street thug in RoboCop.
No, he wasn't the street cop. He wasn't the thug in RoboCop.
No, that was Malcolm in the Middle.
That was the guy from Harry and the Hendersons, Clarence Boddicker. Yeah. Like I saw RoboCop and I couldn't help but see that Psycho is the dad from Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah, it's weird because it's the dad from That 70s Show. And it's just like, well, why are you in this film? Now that we're real quick, they actually reused all the Starship Trooper uniforms in the TV show Firefly. Which
you stole my talking point. Yeah, I was going to say the important legacy of Starship Troopers is that the bad guys in Firefly are wearing the same uniforms.
Yes, they repurposed those costumes.
Yeah.
Oh shit! But Kurtwood Smith, the dad from That 70s Show.
That's it.
Is the bad? I sorry for messing those two guys up. Like I have geez.
I feel like you can be forgiven for that, but So one more thing before we get too far. Obviously, like we said, the movie very much overlays. It has a big impression on how people view the book now because of the cartoonish way it was played up. But obviously, the book has some pretty famous stuff. I always find it funny that they had to change the line like the city fathers of Carthage. Ask that to the violence never solves anything. Ask the fathers of Carthage. And I always wonder if he just didn't think anyone would know that, so they had to update it.
Change it to Hiroshima,
right? But obviously there's that line.
Hiroshima still exists.
Yeah. But Ostrakon, you were saying one interesting thing was the focus on ritual. And what that means for kind of the military guys. I thought that might be interesting to touch on real quick.
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of things they do in the book that the character of Johnny Rico doesn't quite understand when he is first exposed to it, and it doesn't necessarily make logical sense that as the book goes on is kind of revealed to him. Some small examples or stuff that I thought was kind of cool was how every ship has its own calling song. Like the Valley Forge and the Roger Young all have a song that's specific to that ship. And when they get recalled from a combat situation, they're waiting and listening for that song. Or if they're in port, in order to get called to their ship, they listen out for that song, which I just thought that was kind of cool. But like from more of a political side of it, the one of the things that's revealed to him is the reason why they make it difficult or discourage people from joining to begin with is because the whole purpose of military service in this organ or in this book is it's got to be something that's difficult, and it's got to be something that you have to achieve, and it's basically your citizenship must be earned. And when they talk about it, the truth is it's not this service to the state is actually not economically practical. I mean, it becomes economically practical once the war starts between the arachnids and the humans. But up until that point, when there's no war going on, it's actually a burden on the state financially to allow people to have military service, because there's more people than work available. And so, but they don't change the system. They still allow the system. They still allow people to join, because it's this rite of passage is critical to the function and the continuation of the state. So it's in the state's best interest to allow people to serve and have those bonds of not necessarily even combat, because most people in the book don't actually see combat, although the main character does because he's part of the mobile infantry. But having that bond, that commonality of service, to connect all these individuals together into a unit, and then that legacy of that allows them to become better citizens, right? They've earned that citizenship, and they will have a vested interest in how the state is managed and functioned, and how it will function, versus somebody who's just given that right or that gift of political representation. And I mean, you can, if you want to compare it to today, it's the same reason you have all veterans often hang out together in social organizations, right? You got like the VFW, or you've got like the American Legion, right? These are organizations of which people who have these common bonds wish to spend time together, and it's the ritual of the military service is healthy for the maintenance of the state.
Do you guys remember the what caused the this system to take over, the current system to take over in Starship Troopers? I remember
go ahead, tell it. Yeah,
it was the failures of the social worker bureaucracy that led to what was essentially a Clockwork Orange future, in which the military took over and realized, hey, personal responsibility actually matters in keeping a healthy political system intact.
I kind of would like a book that was solely focused on that. I wish Heinlein had written that.
But I imagine it would look a lot like Mussolini's March on Rome, or something in which the vets seize power in this coup against the social workers in the nanny state. It would be kind of cool, but I'm not sure how unfashy it would be.
It's not. I don't really like the term fascism keeps being brought up when it comes to it's not a fascist government in the book, though. I disagree. It's not a dictatorship.
Like I know, but the sort of Starship Troopers IP has been sort of it has this sort of aesthetic that the movie grafted onto it. That I mean, if you want to get into the differences between the book and the movie, like in the movie, the mobile infantry are closer to like if you've ever played Halo, it's the ODST essentially, who drop McNukes and have these massive like jetpacks, and it's a lot different than the sort of mindless drones and disposable, I guess, individual units that you might see in like the like World War II or something like that. Like the aesthetics of the book are much different than the aesthetics of the movie, but it's so conflated, and no one actually has any like most people don't actually have any experience with the book, so all they have is the movie. I'm not sure.
Like I said, I think you're right that both of those have become unfortunately inextricable for a lot of people. And maybe the book is, or definitely the movie is far more impactful on how people see it now, because it's hard to get, I guess, kind of the aesthetics and everything out of your mind once you've seen it that way. But I think it was interesting because you started going on to the social scientists, and so that dovetails into Selfish Neurons super chat. He says, I think most important ideas of Heinlein are selection criteria of representatives and democracy in general are essential, and 2, social sciences destroy society. And so I just thought we'd maybe talk on that a little bit more, because that kind of dovetails into what you were saying.
I mean, the third book, Stranger in a Strange Land, is sort of the anomaly to this question, but for the first 2 books, of course, like political entities, in order to properly both exist and have a very real impact on your life, have to be viscerally experienced. Service guarantees citizenship. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You actually have to be an active political entity and not just a gadfly on the surface.
You said that earlier. You have to have skin in the game.
Right.
I agree.
Like how much that how much that has to do with Stranger in a Strange Land is a little bit, I guess, complicated.
Yeah, well, now might be a good time to move over to that one, and you guys will have to help me a little bit with this one, because I read Stranger in Strange Land, but it's been a long time. But the general gist of the book is a guy who is kind of the last surviving. You're post World War III, and there's a expedition to Mars, and the guy he was like born on the ship. And they thought like everybody had kind of died, but this guy ends up getting raised by the Martians who are on Mars, and he kind of returns back to Earth. And this is the stranger in a strange land, obviously. Like, this is the guy.
And apparently the Martians are bonobos. Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't make the joke.
Like telepathic bonobos.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have that reference.
Free love.
Okay. Yeah, so it's definitely a novel that was very popular. I think it came out in the 60s, right? It was definitely very popular with
61.
that. It was 61. Okay. So yeah, that was very popular with that crowd. It was something that was supposed to be capturing the spirit of that age. And like I said, that's why I find Heinlein interesting, because he can kind of write like, well, you're correct that there's always these themes connecting these things, and his proclivities for sure. But he can always write kind of with the zeitgeist of a particular culture or structure in mind. And that's definitely what he's exploring in Stranger in a Strange Land, is this human raised by Martians who comes in and has their lifestyle and has their mental gifts. He ends up having like psychic powers and that kind of thing, and starts impacting the religions and the cults around Earth, kind of post this World War III scenario. Ends up leading these people kind of spiritually as well.
Like on Earth, there was something like you could probably compare the religions on Earth to like decadent Joel Osteen megachurches, except incredibly degenerate. And then you have this new woo-woo Martian guy come in and kind of supplant it with the true word, in which you have to join the sex cult to actually understand true spirituality. I'm not exactly sure what the theological significance of, like, I'm not sure if Heinlein actually understands Christianity at all. I'm not sure what he thought in real life, but the sort of theology that he constructs is very perverse and new agey woo woo.
It feels like kind of like a new age Martin Luther going back to the established church and stating that, because it's right, because all the mega churches back on Earth actively support prostitution and gambling and alcohol consumption, as long as it's under the auspices of the church. And then he represents a he brings in this new religion, new philosophy that he's learned from Mars and introduces it to the people of Earth. This book was awfully 60s for me.
Like what was the main character's name? It was
The alien or the
actual. It was like Valentine something.
Valentine Michael Smith.
It's like Mike. Yeah, it was Mike. He
Man from Mars is what they usually called him.
Yeah, I was complaining him with Muna's harsh mistress, but Mike is effectively a Christ-like figure coming to proselytize this new religion to helpfully redeem the Earth before the Martians come and destroy the Earth in 5,000 years. But I'm not sure what to think of it.
I think it's about, as opposed to introducing a new political philosophy, it's introducing a new religious philosophy in this book. I think that's what he's trying to do.
I mean, okay, but I'll just put the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
This religious philosophy seems to be almost diametrically opposed to, I mean, the other two books we reviewed, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Starship Troopers, seem to have fairly right-wing political philosophies, either in the libertarian direction with some kind of cabal of overlords, or in the military government, I won't call it fascist direction, with Starship Troopers. And now all of a sudden we get to Stranger in a Strange Land and it's like free love religion. How did these pieces fit together at all? I think a lot of people ask that, right?
I don't like it either.
What?
It's okay if you didn't like this book. I wasn't.
I like the book. It's fun. I mean, it is what it is, right? But I mean, it makes me ask questions about how Heinlein, the man, thinks human organization can and should work.
Sure,
I don't want to call it boomer, but it is kind of boomer.
No, it certainly is. And while I certainly selected two of these books because they're kind of interesting politically, and that is a core of like kind of what we talk about. In some way, Strangers in Strangeland is kind of the odd stepchild, but also arguably his most well-known book. Like if it wasn't for the movie Starship Troopers, it would absolutely be his most successful book, right? Stranger in a Strangeland is, I think, by far the best-selling one, and had the greatest cultural impact when it came out. So while it doesn't jive with some of the other ones we talk about, I thought it would be worth making sure it gets in there, just because it is probably in the wider context his most influential work. And you can see if you read Heinlein more widely, if you look at Farnham's Freehold, which you can't find in a bookstore anymore, or if you look at Time Enough for Love, or some of these things, they don't always end up in necessarily that political direction, or that looking at those particular structures. The Moon and the Harsh Mistress and Starship Troopers are certainly interesting because they kind of work closer together in that way. But I don't think that's the only thing he looks at in his wider body of work.
I mean, one of the commonalities, I guess, Heinlein has with the other of the big three sci-fi authors of the time was his work was very atheistic, and then you have Stranger in a Strange Land, which is a theological piece. Like in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, religion is always a means to an end for this structure to maintain civilization. In Heinlein's books, I'm not sure. I don't think there's any sort of organized religion on the moon, and I don't remember. Like, was there anything in Starship Troopers about religion? I mean, you have this one world government.
Yeah, it's he doesn't focus much on religion in either book. I think I want to say it's mentioned briefly in both, but it's definitely not the it's not one of the pillars of the state.
Yeah. And then you have this theological battle between good and evil, and a struggle to maintain, or the struggle to save mankind through spiritual means. And this man from Mars is literally the Archangel Michael.
Yeah, that does get implied at the end of the book. Yeah,
He's the incarnation of Michael.
It's heretical. It's perverse. I'm not sure what to think about it.
It's almost like to use Dave's point. It's almost like if a boomer is like, I'm gonna fix religion, like it kind of has that. That feel to it, like they're getting most of this wrong. I'll paste and copy this together.
I mean, it is. I mean, I appreciate the book for what it is, but it is a pretty cringe fix on religion. Can you imagine what that would look like? If your congregation undertook what they were trying to do here, how cringe that would be.
Just have a lot of sex.
It's like I'm going to turn my parish into a nude bathhouse with 60-year-old boomers in it
with blackjack.
Wow, kids in church moment.
Well, and it does have that very I mean, obviously your churches were corrupt and everyone was just having sex in them anyway, and legal prostitution, everything. We're just taking away all the edifices. We're just getting back. We're still going to leave all the promiscuity in. It's just now we're going to be honest about it. Now it's real.
Yeah, it was very much do what you feel in the book, and I've got nothing else to say about this one.
Yeah, I'm going to start my own religion with hookers and blow.
Yeah, I mean, sure, you go for it, buddy. That's nice.
I think it's very interesting how the sort of boomer mindset evolved from the sort of woo-woo hippie stranger in a strange land to sort of neoconservative, neoliberal mindset that we're struggling against today with that generation.
You can kind of see how it evolves, though, can't you?
It evolves into us.
Well, all of the prints are there in all of Heinlein's work, right? You have the sort of neo-conny, get them before they get us, plus be responsible, Starship Troopers, and then go forth and multiply and settle down and have kids and fight the man in Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And then there's the sort of new age, enjoy free love while you're young of Stranger in a Strange Land. So if you want to look at the stages of boomer life, the boomer starts out as a young person reading Stranger in a Strange Land, grows older with the Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and then settles down Starship Troopers.
The boomer life cycle as captured by Robert Heinlein.
When do we get to Starship Troopers? I've never met any boomer who's arrived at an unironic version of that. Did Paul Vanderhoeven ruin that?
Yeah,
it's a shame too, because I think it would be really good as a long form TV show or a miniseries, but it'll never happen.
I see the Starship Troopers can be interpreted as something like apologetics for the military-industrial complex, or some need for a vestigial, martial spirit. That
I don't think it's so vestigial. I think it's necessary for if the state cannot protect the people, then it is no state that deserves to exist.
I mean vestigial insofar as the military, not during times of war, keeps exercising its muscles, so it doesn't have to be. But
anyway, for the audience, read Starship Troopers. It's the best of the three, if you haven't read them. But yeah, it's I obviously have I'm opinionated on that one.
So one of the Poes in chat, and she was saying, talking about Heinlein's technical side. She's an engineer, so that's probably something she appreciates more. I'm not particularly science minded beyond just pop science or general knowledge. But I have always enjoyed that he is kind of particular and practical about some of the explanations. But I didn't know if you guys had any thoughts on the science aspect of the sci-fi, since we spent all the time on the politics and culture side.
I mean, he was a naval engineer for the U.S. Navy during World War One.
Oh, okay.
He
World War II, right? That couldn't have been World War One.
It's got to be World War II. He's too young to be.
Yeah, he couldn't possibly have been in World War One.
I misspoke.
I love his technical side. I think it's pretty light in the books as far as his technical aspects of it. But I mean, yeah, that's he spends maybe about 20% of the Moon is the Harsh Mistress and Starship Troopers talking about technical aspects. But it's I love his solutions for a lot of the problems within their societies. I think they're pretty interesting. I love the concept in the Moon is a Harsh Mistress that you can't live on the Moon for an extended period of time without being permanently like stranded there. And I think that was kind of a cool idea.
You mean like the kind of like how
like your body adapts?
Well, I remember the book said something like if you live on the Moon too long, your heart doesn't work as hard because it doesn't experience gravity quite it doesn't experience the acceleration of all the G's of Earth. So when you go down onto Earth, you have to be very calm. You can't walk upstairs, or else you'll have a heart attack from your weak heart.
Yeah, you can't overexert yourself, or it'll kill you.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because he has fishes out of water for both of those, right? So when the Earth people get there, like they can't walk, like stairs are impossible because they don't understand how to like float down them correctly.
Yeah,
so they
just
wrecking themselves.
Yeah, all the shock troopers that go and try and invade the Moon like can't navigate the Moon effectively.
Right, that's a big advantage for them, is that when the Earth troops try to land during the revolution, they can't figure out how to just get around, and so a lot of their casualties are just them unable to navigate stairs in a society where like that is essential because you live underground.
Yeah, that was a cool little like technical aspect of the book. And then I mean, obviously the way he describes how the orbital drop troopers, the Starship Troopers, actually land on a planet, and all the process of it is very cool.
Like just dropping like little McNuke grenades everywhere while you're getting shot out of a spaceship.
Yeah, like the little drop pods that they come in, and all the different layers and the description of it.
That influenced so many sci-fi, drop pods.
Yeah, it's totally. Yeah, 100%. Like I would say the majority of popular science fiction, which has any sort of like military like part of the science fiction, borrows very heavily from Starship Troopers.
Yeah, if you play
yes, I find that very funny because it's only like 20% of the novel. It's such a light part of the novel, but so much of our popular culture has been drawn from it.
Yeah, if you play tabletop 40K, you'll literally drop your Space Marines from like the drop pods that that are similar to what's in there.
Yeah, it's funny how much of our culture is influenced by this book, and it really only a few paragraphs of this book, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, have you guys ever played or seen like Halo ODST? Like these essentially they're kind of like Space Marines, kind of like well-equipped guys dropping from space with jetpacks, doing reconnaissance, and
I mean ODST. They borrow what's the Titanfall borrows very heavily from Starship Troopers and how they all land and everything. And
only insofar as they just drop.
Yeah, well, I mean, but even like the description of like the pods and then also like you say in Warhammer 40K is very similar, and this idea of these kind of crack troops falling from the sky. But yeah,
Oh, but one thing I did want to mention, Ostrakon, because we were talking about this before we went live, but I thought that was interesting is obviously, famously in the movie, they're not wearing the mech suits that the troops wear in Starship Troopers in the book, right? But one of the interesting things when we were talking about ritual, what that I thought was a really interesting part of that book was when the two of the trainers would get together and do like the judo. In the keys, and at first Rico looks at it and he's like, this is dumb, like this doesn't teach us anything. They're not using the exoskeleton, they're not using the technology, like we can't throw a bug in pajamas, right? But then he slowly realizes like the importance of still training in this manner and learning this and carrying this discipline forward.
It's the physical actions that they take feeds into the training and the philosophy of the suits and how they perform as soldiers. So it's it's almost like you got to crawl before you can walk, and it's you have to be able to control your body, marshal your body in its most basic form before you should consider moving on up to these more advanced forms of combat. And we even do it to this day, in the military, even though most soldiers are never going to be in direct contact with the enemy. And even those that are going to be using rifles or they're going to be calling for fire, or they're going to be using these relatively high technology devices in order to fight the enemy. You still learn combatives. You still learn how to knife fight. You still learn these very basic forms of combat because it all builds on each other. So like he said, Johnny Rico learns throughout the book that the rituals they perform before they actually learn the practical material has value. And I think that's a big theme in the book.
Yeah, definitely. So before we finish out any super chats, did you guys want to talk about anything else that we didn't hit about any of the books or the themes we didn't get to?
I saw in the comments that Poe the Person mentioned, or she commented, I thought the polygamy in Moon Mistress was presented a bit uncritically, literally cucked. Like I remember there was a passage where Manny was asked about his kids, and he was like, well, the kid is probably Greg's, but it might be mine. I'm not sure how Heinlein thought it read, but
this is sort of like the same Stranger in Strange Land thing, this is the fantasy of polygamy where you just don't care about this stuff.
What's like, is the kid mine? Well, probably not, but I'm still taking care of it. I don't know. It's just kind of bizarre how this guy who is incredibly conscientious in terms of, I guess, military hierarchy and political theory. You must be an active agent in the political system, but personal life. Is the kid mine? I don't know.
I mean, here we are, four guys talking about it in 2020, so it must be doing something right.
or a lot of boomers liked it at the time.
So
it was pretty influential.
I think we're picking wisdom out of Heinlein's shit view about human sexuality and social organization. I really think that we're just getting sort of boomer fantasy fed back across the space of 50 years. This does not, in my mind, this does not hold up. You look at, people have tried to do this. You see this all over the place on the left, and it's just pure and adulterated cringe. There's nothing wise about doing about this kind of organizational style. It certainly isn't politically sustainable, as implied by Heinlein.
I think you're right. I think it's certainly a interpersonal disaster. The only thing I thought interesting about the only novel in which I thought was interesting particularly was Munijahara Mistress, and only because he basically manufactures the society in which it would be necessary, right? Like that's the only that they like basically he's like, I've built the society so that this might have to work. I still don't think it's necessary, but I think that is funny that is the one novel in which he's like, well, if society ended up exactly this way with these pressures, maybe then this would be a thing we would need.
I mean, fair enough. You can engineer the parameters of your ideal society on the moon. It's like great. Penal colony, scarce resources. You have to make some sacrifices. Is the kid yours? No, but at least I can coom.
Right. Yeah.
And you still get nagged.
Yeah, that's the most. Now you have multiple naggers. That's the
yeah.
But all right. So if that was everything we wanted to hit on Heinlein, we did have one super chat here that's generally about Neo reaction. We had BHW say, great to see you all together. Curious if NRX folks consider publishing a collection of essays or maybe a journal. Please don't let James Lindsay take credit for the cathedral. Yeah. James Lindsay is famously doing kind of low resolution acceptable versions of NRX on Twitter right now. But yeah, that's an interesting question. It's honestly something I've kind of joked about and kicked around, is just, thinking about other formats to get this stuff down so that it's presentable beyond people who watch political YouTube. But I don't know if anybody else has had any thoughts on that.
I mean, I remember AA was talking about creating some journal or another, but I don't think that ever got off the ground. There is, of course, the old blogs, and there is Grey Mirror right now.
I think Substack might be a way to do this. If people start writing worse, I'm thinking of starting Substack, because if people write more serious, long-lasting stuff on Substack, they can finance it in part, and then we can aggregate them into sort of books or collections later for physical publication.
Yeah, I was thinking something along this line where I was like, maybe I can take some of the stuff that I've been, doing for videos and turn it into a more readable, reader-friendly format, and makes more sense in that way. And then, like you said, later on, that can get turned into, we can start seeing essay collections or other things that would make that something we could see in the future.
Certainly the WordPress blog format is dead at this stage. I don't think anyone uses that. I mean, I tried that before in the past, and it just doesn't work. No one absorbs information that way anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I started doing things on YouTube, honestly, as I was writing it, and I'm like, no one's going to come watch. No one's going to come read this stuff. Like, it was hard enough to get people to read things when I was like at an actual newspaper.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the main reasons I started doing things on YouTube is just like, okay, at least people actually consume content this way. But
I think, to answer this is a really interesting question that the super chatter gave. And, and I know this is off topic, but this subject really excites me. I do think, just as in 2014, people were ready to go from WordPress to YouTube, I think there is a desire right now on the right to take the ideas developed on YouTube and then see them in a more permanent, long-lasting format, going like, these are the nuggets of wisdom that we've been able to suss out over our careers discussing politics and culture. And I noticed that, and I think it might be time to explore different mediums, because we might be in the process of losing our platforms in a variety of contexts on these social media sites.
Yeah, there's definitely a concern about how long that's going to be an option. So finding and eventually at some point just fleeing from video platform to video platform isn't going to work, as we saw with Parler. Just normal conservatives moved off of Facebook and Twitter for a little while, and it's the first thing that got nuked. Thinking that some of these other more popular ones are going to last too long. I've been uploading my stuff to Rumble, but that's basically a Patreon or rather a Parler property, as I understand it. So who knows if they're next, right? Like,
So it sounds like we need to set up a pirate satellite radio station or something.
Everybody gear up those shortwave radios, kids.
Yeah.
Well, for a long time, I always thought that the future of YouTube would be to create sort of a 24/7 radio that anyone could just kind of tune into, and that would replay content from reactionary spheres, mix it with music. Maybe, I don't know, it was a thought, but I'm not so sure. It's always hard to tell what form of media people are going to use. I think that we're in a transition period right now as well.
Hey, Auron, I just wanted to say thanks for inviting me to do this, by the way. I really enjoyed reading these books, and it would be really a lot of fun if we did something like this in the future with some more books.
Yeah, I was thinking, honestly, I don't know about how you guys feel about, but Philip K. Dick is one that I thought would be really interesting, because he's had a number of different books or short stories that have gone from science fiction to the big screen or the small screen. Obviously, you've got Blade Runner out of Do You Dream of Electric Sheep, or Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And then Man in the High Castle is actually a personal favorite of mine. I find the writing style of Man in the High Castle really compelling.
Did you ever see the show?
I saw the first 2 seasons. By the time I got to the 3rd season, I was like, meh. Like this is an idea that probably was best done in the book. But that could be an interesting line of discussion. I figure, you've got Minority Report, you've got Total Recall, you've got a lot of classic sci-fi properties that have gone, particularly from short stories. He's got a lot of short stories that get developed. You were mentioning something about that yesterday, Clossington thing, and I was like, yeah, he's like the anti-Stephen King. Like he has a lot of stuff that actually gets developed into surprisingly good television or movie properties.
Well, it's like unlike Stephen King, Philip K. Dick can actually end a book.
Yes. Yeah.
Like and not drag it on for like 1,000 pages.
I like that Stephen King and Pulp Fiction guy. What's his name? Quentin Tarantino. I like that Stephen King and Quentin Tarantino both only know how to end things the exact same way, which is just to get all the characters crazy and blow everything up at the end and murder everybody.
They're not very good at endings. Either one of them are.
No. But yeah, I agree. I think it'd be interesting to do more of these, and I was thinking about maybe Philip K. Dick for our next one. So depending on how much homework you guys want to do or how much you've already read, maybe we'll line that up.
Okay.
Again.
I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep about a week ago, and I think I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a lot more enjoyable than I actually expected. And I've read Man in High Castle. Really liked that one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's digestible enough for, I guess, people to just easily pick it up. Whereas Starship Troopers and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress are a little bit longer form.
Well, like I said, a lot of his best stuff is actually short stories. So you can definitely get through a good amount of his better work by just going through a short story collection.
I mean, it's kind of like how like Stephen King's best movie adaptation is Shawshank Redemption.
I was going to say,
nice short story.
You don't like The Shining?
I mean, I do, but it's nothing like the book.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's yeah.
The Shining's a great movie, but it's like saying you don't like Dune the movie. Like, I don't know.
Oh, well, okay, fair enough. I guess it's the opposite direction there, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I hope the new movie is going to be good. It's not going to be, but I hope it will be.
Yes, I have the same.
You don't like Dune from the 80s? Like I like the flying
Patrick Stewart, and it's not great.
Sting doing knife battles. Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So we'll do another one of these. We'll get something together, maybe put together around Philip K. Dick or I do Frank Herbert, but Dave already did an exhaustive and good talk about that. So I don't know if that's the way to go.
Hey, you can always talk more about Dune. I would be happy to.
Fair enough. Okay, so maybe we'll try to make the sci-fi book chat a more regular thing. But I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Again, thanks for coming by. We had a good crowd, good questions. Thanks for the super chats. Like I said, I'm sure all of you are already subbed to the Distributist in Clossington. But on the weird chance you're not, the links are below the video. Please make sure you're subbed to me if you're here new. And you can everything else you need to know is in the video down there. I've put a couple new designs on the merch store too, so if you want memes on coffee cups, you have that option. But thanks to everybody who came by. Thanks to all the guests, and as always, guys, we will talk to you next time.